Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Bond, Awards Editor of TheWrap, and we're so happy to have you here for our 2021 Emmy Awards screening of The Underground Railroad with director and showrunner Barry Jenkins and cinematographer James Laxton. We're going to start by showing you the trailer to the limited series, and then we'll go right into a conversation with our panelists. To the audience, please participate in the live chat, share your thoughts about the conversation, let us know where you're watching from. And before I introduce Barry and James, let's take a look at the trailer.
Ere I saw a dappled wonder settling across the fields, hovering on angel wings, brandishing a blazing shield.
Where do they go? The ones that run away and never return.
There is nothing here but suffering, pain and suffering. It is time to go.
The girl in that bulletin is wanted for the murder of a child.
Man lost my mama, then me. Ain't no way he ever given up on finding me.
There's anger in you. It'll fuel you, yes, but what's the worst kind of fuel?
The worst kind.
Savagery a man is capable of when he believes his cause to be just.
You came all this way on the railroad?
Yeah. I left behind all those peoples.
Nothing was given. All was earned. Hold on to what belongs to you. What's their name?
Welcome back. It's my pleasure to introduce director and showrunner Barry Jenkins and cinematographer James Laxton. Welcome, guys. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So I know you've been working on this for quite a while. I mean, my understanding, Underground Railroad, the book came out like within a month of when Moonlight came out, right?
Not even came out through my reps and various fancy people. Actually, I read the book before it released and before Moonlight premiered at Telluride, pretty much probably almost 5 years ago to the day, because Telluride's always Labor Day weekend, so it would have been August of 2016. Yeah, when I first read the book.
Mm-hmm. And did you know right away it was something you wanted to do?
I did. Especially because Colson's such a brilliant writer. At that point, it hadn't won the Pulitzer, but you could tell from reading it that there was something very special about it. And the biggest thing is I could just see it as I was reading it, and so I kind of knew it was something that we would chase.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, at that point, did the book was I think pretty popular immediately. Did you? At that point, before your Oscars and all of that, did you think that you had a shot at actually landing what I imagine was a pretty prized property?
It's interesting. I did and I didn't. I sent Colson a link to Moonlight before it premiered, and he really loved the film. So it was clear he was responding to our work. So I thought there was a chance, but I had actually tried to adapt or get the rights to his first novel, The Intuitionist, many, many years before, and didn't get much traction. So there was also quite a bit of doubt of whether or not it was possible.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, James, did you read it at the same time?
I don't think so. No, definitely not. I'm definitely not as I don't have the fancy people Barry has to give him early copies of things. But so I probably read it, a year or two later when we started to kind of, I guess, conceptually understand that this might be the next thing we might, sink our teeth into. So it would have been, 2017 or something like that.
Yeah. Right. So when you started talking about it, was it clear that it was going to be, not a movie, but a mini series of this scope?
For me, yeah, I actually one of the earliest conversations I had with Coulson, especially because as you alluded to earlier, I wasn't sure if I would get the book. I thought the best way to do this is to be really clear and be really honest. And so I told him I had no interest in making it as a feature film, that it had to be a television show.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, it ended up being, 10 hours with the same DP, the same director, I assume a lot of the same crew. Did you ever think about, a lot of limited series will dole out episodes to different directors? Did you ever consider that, or was this always something that, that you and James were going to tackle every minute of it?
Yeah, I always felt like it was going to be something that James and I tackled every minute of it. I do remember we had a more seasoned crew member on the crew who was with us for the first quarter of the shoot. And before departing, he said to James and I, he goes, "Yeah, you guys are really great, and you're probably going to do a really good job, but you're going to kill yourselves. And it'll be worth it, but I'm telling you, you're going to die making this show." Do you remember that, James?
I very much do. Yeah, I do. I mean, it was sage words, but I think part of what there's a bit of innocence to the idea of just taking it all on. But within that innocence, sometimes things happen, and when some really beautiful images pop up, and I think I'm for example, very happy to have done everything. I don't know that I would have wanted to, just do portions of the show or things like that.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, when you read it, James, did you see it in the way Barry did?
Well, I hope so. I think in terms of the idea that it wanted to be a series, for example, I think that was pretty, I think I probably heard that was the idea in the first place, but it became really obvious that was the right choice really quickly when reading the book, and then when reading the scripts as well, of course. I think there's so much in there. It's a very dense story, obviously. And I think when you have such, a much longer runtime to express yourself, obviously you can get much more nuanced, make much more specific and unique choices that, I don't mean to say that feature filmmaking is broad, because it certainly is not, but just that you get to sort of really dive deeper into character things. And I think based on the idea that, so much of our creative choices that Barry and I decide upon have so much to do with character, it allows us to really be, quite specific, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Right. So did you kill yourselves making it?
We're here, but
yeah, we're here, so I guess not. But so not in the literal sense, but in the figurative sense, hell yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the intriguing things about this is that it has its basis in real events in the slavery era, and I'm sure you have a responsibility to depict that accurately, but it also takes place in this world that is tinged with fantasy, where the Underground Railroad is actually real trains that run underground. So how do you find the balance between, being true to what really happened to to your ancestors in that time, and also allowing for the fantasy element?
Yeah, I think Coulson did a great job of giving us a head start on some of those choices and some of that balancing, to be honest. And I think then it was just about, because it's a television show, really understanding the rhythms of a watch over the course of a series and having a fidelity to the agency of the main character. And so at the very beginning, there's got to be almost like this Big Bang kind of energy that shoots Cora, into the universe, onto this journey. And as she gets further and further away from Georgia, the realism, the magical realism, which I think is still very grounded in the way James and the crew and everyone else shot it and sort of built it. But as she gets further away from that first Big Bang event, then I think we can rely on, we always talked about showing versus telling. We can tell more of these atrocities, these brutalities that were visited upon my ancestors. Whereas at the beginning, at that Big Bang moment, we kind of have to show. because you need to know, one, just how chaotic, just how brutal this world is, to inspire the character to finally risk everything, in the pursuit of a freedom that is completely elusive and at that point maybe a fantasy. And so it was always about having conversations about that. It's kind of dope. Coulson's been talking a lot about the difference between truth and fact and fiction. We talk about, oh, it's a fictional take on the Underground Railroad, which means it's not fact. And yet, even though it's fiction, it's still very much truthful. When I was in elementary school, this article came out a couple months ago about the textbooks that we were still reading as children in public schools in the South. And those textbooks referred to the institution of American slavery as almost conscripted labor, was how it was referred to. And I would have learned more about the truth of that era by reading the fiction of Toni Morrison than I did reading those textbooks. And so that was always the conversation that we had to have.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, there is that scene in the first episode towards the end. There is a scene of horrifying violence where a man is whipped and burned while plantation owners have an elegant lunch and watch. And I think that's the most graphic. I mean, a lot of the times when something horrible is happening, we're sort of watching the characters watch it rather than being forced to look at what's happening to this man. In that case, you show him with his flayed skin and all. I mean, was it important that had to be in the early stages of the show?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's the inciting sort of motivator of the Big Bang I'm referring to in the book, and so we knew it would have the same function in the show. And again, this idea between showing versus telling, that was something that I decided we had to show. And then for James and I, it was about, well, what are we saying about these types of images and showing them? And I think what you alluded to was the place we landed, or if we can show how the acute trauma of one becomes a communal trauma of all by these people being forced to bear witness, then we can maybe unlock something about the creation of these kinds of images that makes the audience viewing them worthwhile. Because otherwise it's just sensational for sensationalism's sake. And it was kind of interesting. We actually shot listed. That's one of the few episodes that we shot listed every moment of that episode. And, James carried the shot list because on that day, I was less a craftsperson on that day and more a human being. There was no fire, no blood, and yet it still felt very, very real. And we just came up with a schematic of viewing these things, through the point of view of the people being forced to witness, and then of course through the point of view of the character Big Anthony being subjected to these brutalities. And then we just sort of got there on the day and we just kind of did it and hoped that, the ideas that we put into the conception of it would carry it through in a way that would make the endeavor worthwhile. James, what did you think of how that day went and how we approached that scene?
Yeah, no, it was definitely one of the harder ones of the shoot. I mean, we had plenty of difficult moments in the story that we were having to sort of photograph, but that was top of list in terms of difficult ones. And I don't know, it was tough. I think it was difficult to separate your personal emotions with a job, and having to sort of still continue to, set lights up and move cameras. And I think a part of the job that I struggled with the most throughout the whole show, but definitely on this day as well, was, having to come up to actors and ask them to step a little to their left or step a little to their right while they're, going through such difficult moments. Yeah, I mean, that theme ran through the whole show. And I think, I think we were all lucky enough to work with a lot of really, beautiful people and a lot of supportive individuals on the set, and to sort of help us through some of these moments. But no doubt that was a difficult one. But I do think, just to say, I think it was the way in which we put our cameras and what perspectives that really mattered. I think the telling of these tales, not from a sort of, an omniscient perspective, it was really important, and to sort of get into the heart and soul of some of our characters. And, but camera placement became a big part of that for sure.
Hey, James, actually, I just thought of something, and I don't remember if this is the case. I'm trying to remember the order of shooting those episodes. I do remember that we ended all that work at the big house because Mabel with breastfeeding, I think that was the last thing we did in that area of the set. So I imagine we had already done all those portraits for the gays by the time we got to seeing with Big Anthony. And so I think that, because you were talking about, how do you talk to an actor, in a particular background actor? Can you move a little bit here, a little bit there when you're doing these very horrific things? But I think we had somehow bonded by that point. Everyone had fused, because I think the background understood, anytime we're doing these things, we're not just dressing, we're a part of this moment. So much so that by that point, we had literally given everyone a portrait, anyone who was there to witness the things that we were doing. So yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Well, let's talk for a minute about the gays, because that's, through the limited series, we see moments where the camera is just looking at the characters who basically are staring back into the camera or just off the camera. And it's really just these little studies of these characters. It's not there to advance the plot. It's to, to show us these characters face to face. And you've now taken those and I think a lot more than are in the movie and turned them into a separate piece. I mean, how did that idea come about? So you were doing that during the shoot from early on?
Yeah, it kind of started. We always have what we call a day zero. Before we start filming the show, we'll go to the actual locations with the actual actors, and we'll just do these we call them camera tests, but we're always fishing for things that could ultimately end up in the show. One of those that ends up in the show in a really big way is the last shot of Caesar in Indiana Winter is a day zero shot, and Ridgway having his nightmare being in the tunnel is a day zero shot as well. But then there were also these portraits, and as we were making the actual show, and shout out to James for this, I sometimes would just get inspired and be like, hey, I want to get a shot of that person, and James would build this dolly track, and he had a certain measurement and all these different things. It got to be uniform as we were going through the show, and we would just pause making the limited series and begin making this thing, The Gays. I'm shocked that James went with it because, with so much material to cover, every moment that we dedicate to doing one of these portraits is a moment we're not dedicating to actually getting the show in the can. And yet, I think we both have faith that something about that was just as important as the scene work. And so we just continue to do them.
I think, to me, witnessing the production was actually really inspiring. What you had around us was a really beautiful set that Mark Freeberger designed. I'm talking about, Georgia episodes, for example. And then we planted all this sugarcane and built all these cabins. And when the extras arrived, all of a sudden it just took to life. And there was this huge amount of, it just felt so inspiring. I'll say that. And I think it felt like when we're shooting some of these scenes, it was, they're beautiful scenes, no doubt about it. But there's an element sort of aside that you look to your right and you see people cutting sugarcane off of it and using the sugarcane press and all these different things. And if we found a way to get that into the show, and I think it sort of found its way within The Gays, it just felt to me that the story would feel much more holistic and all of a sudden had this different scope. You could understand that Cora's journey was also many people's journeys, in some other way as well. So it just sort of felt like, of course we'll do these, they mean so much to the series, to the story, also our experience as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, you used the word beautiful a couple of times there. And one thing that I think that the Underground Railroad does is it finds this real balance between lyricism and beauty and then the extreme pain and suffering of the story you're telling. I mean, how do you, for both of you, how do you calibrate that? How do you, is there a point when it can be too beautiful for your story?
I never felt that way, especially because, we filmed the show entirely in the state of Georgia, and we filmed it almost exclusively in natural environments. We did quite a bit of stage work, but, we were in this place where these things happened. And so it felt like there was a veracity to the beauty that was asserting itself. on the frame, and it almost would have been false for us to try to do things to take that beauty away. I mean, we do that in the Tennessee episode, especially the first Tennessee chapter, and yet even that has a way of being beautiful. You know, I think the work of Cormac McCarthy is beautiful. You know, and yet it's also, you know, quite brutal to a certain degree. And so it always felt like there was an attention, that there was a balance, this yin and yang between these two elements. And also too, I think the way, and you know, as James alluded to, I'll say this for all the cast and especially the background actors, even in the face of witnessing such brutality, there was just so much vitality and life and light, you know, emanating from these people. And so whenever it wanted to poke through, you feel like, oh yeah, this is the whole point of this thing. You know, this beauty just cannot be completely vanquished, especially once we get to Valentine Farm.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, James, was that a consideration of yours in terms of, you know, capturing the lyricism and the beauty while also, you know, telling this story?
I think there's something about I would maybe use the word like a sensitivity to the story, and not wanting to just throw on a documentary aggressive style to things. I think that the story we're telling has such sensitivity and such nuance. And I think it would have been sort of, just a strange choice to sort of just push this sort of realism in quotations idea, not to mention, you know, there is this whole other sort of mythological sort of arm to the story anyway. But I just sort of felt like from the very beginning, it wanted to sort of just watch some of these moments. I think that part of what's hard to watch about them is we do sit on them and not just sort of go in for some tight ECU close up on a wound. Let's say, for example, what we're going to do is just sort of see the difficult moments from afar, possibly from a character's perspective. And that's actually probably going to hit harder, in my opinion, than some sort of like, you know, handheld camera zooming into some expression of grief on someone's face. It's going to sort of sit there and be patient. And probably, you know, in my opinion anyway, it feels more impactful that way. Anyway, yeah.
Steve, I want to say too, just listen to James talk. I'm thinking of the Georgia chapter and the Mabel chapter, which both have scenes that take place in the swamp. And we were trying to film those scenes, those sequences on the same day. And there kept being this problem with the pH balance or the bacterial levels in the water. We had built this whole platform, but it wasn't safe to shoot. And then finally it was safe to shoot. And so we just change everything. We get there, we go there, and it is brutally hot. The smell is so intense, so pungent. It's like one of the most brutal locations I've ever filmed in, but you turn a lens on and it's gorgeous. There's this thick green coat on top of the water. The sun is like the blue on top, bouncing off the green, giving this bright white, kind of like glassy. It's just like, it was insane. And it was like, how do you make that drab? There's just no way. You kind of just like turn the camera on, and then as you get in post-production, you do little things, you know, to make sure you're staying within the aesthetic of the show. But that thing, I mean, there is death all over that swamp, and yet it is ravishingly beautiful. And so it's like the environment we were working in, it was reinforcing this balance, you know, between the death and the life, the brutality and the beauty.
Yeah, right. I assume that many of the people who are watching this have seen much, if not all, of the series. I do know that everybody was sent episode 9 prior to this Q&A, so I want to talk about that a little bit specifically. Also because that's the one, James, that you're nominated for. So, I mean, that's an episode I think that has some real set pieces in it, starting with this lengthy kind of romantic reverie towards the beginning that uses, you know, Claire de Lune instead of Nick Britell. Barry, I mean, what was the idea, knowing where that episode is going? Was it important to have this sort of rapturously romantic section early in the episode?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I think both Cora and Tuso by that point have been through hell, man, and I think that it's. I think I have to admit, or we have to admit, that we are the ones creating this narrative. Because it's not taken from the pages of history. This isn't the autobiography of Frederick Douglass. We are creating this story, and in that creation, just felt right to give her this moment, to give all these characters this moment of just self-actualization, self-satisfaction, of pleasure, of revelry, free from the burdens of the antagonism of the world they live in. After we did that portrait of the group tableau of everyone on the farm. I think that was the second of the group shots we had done. The first one was the one that's completely horizontal, going through the cotton field. It was the second group tableau we had done, and I remember James and I just looked at each other after the first take, and I think, and I'm paraphrasing you, but you said, when I see these portraits, it's just I see all these people looking back at me, and I feel them saying, just look at us. Just look at how beautiful this all could be if the antagonism of the world, wasn't consistently trying to rip it away from us. And it felt important to have a moment of that in the show, particularly in this episode, knowing where this episode was going to end up. And the tableau isn't scripted. We kind of just did it after we had done the corn shucking. The corn shucking just went so well. Everyone had so much fun that the James's words were in my head at that point. They were in my body. Just felt like, we just have to capture this moment of everyone kind of just being present. And I'm so glad we did it. We actually played Claire de Lune on set that day because there was something about just the purity of that piece of music and the way it's been associated with other bodies and other people and other examples through the history of cinema. And I felt like, again, to go to James's quote, why can't these people have this? Why shouldn't they? And why is the world so consistently trying to deny them this moment?
Mm-hmm. Right. So, James, I mean, what were the keys for you in shooting that sequence?
Well, I'll just say, for not only, as Barry just said a minute ago, for Tuso as much as Cora possibly, it was an important day, the corn shucking scene. I think it was the same. I think the crew felt the same way, and I definitely felt the same way as well. This was shot towards the end of our production, and we'd seen so much and worked so hard. I remember distinctly, with the handheld camera pushing in on Mr. and Mrs. Valentine embracing by the fire, and just like tears were coming down my eyes, just thinking about what that meant to them, it became a really emotional night, I think, and one that I just remember distinctly. But I guess for me, it was about sort of, giving the characters the space to express themselves around that fire, to dance, to embrace, and had to have the cameras do something different than and behave differently than they often behaved in the show, which is we sort of, almost like documentary style, put a couple, myself and the other camera operator within the party, so to speak, and just find moments. And it just felt so freeing for us as filmmakers. And I can imagine it felt quite similar to some of the cast and everybody sort of around.
Mm-hmm. Right. Then towards the end of that episode, there's this amazing sequence where two different men give these fiery, eloquent speeches about the future of this farm. And it's basically, I mean, it's just two guys talking to an audience in this, in this room. So when you're shooting that, I mean, what are the keys for you?
For me anyway, what was amazing about that was those hats off to the actors. I mean, those are, we went through the entire scene in takes, for example, and the camera would sort of just push in, pull out at different moments, come in for a close up, come in, and wrap around to see a reaction. It was almost like a live performance in many ways. We didn't sort of break it down into hit sections. And I mean, I remember when the first take was finished and just, it was, I think, something around 15 to 20 minutes of performance. It felt like watching, a play in many ways, or a live performance in some respect. Which I just, obviously inspires everyone around us to sort of, to listen to that and to hear that those words were really meaningful. So for me, it was just about, well, how can I do justice to these performances? That was what was going on in my mind, because clearly the bar had been set very high by those actors, and it was really important for us to, not to do too much with the camera. It was a time for the camera to sort of sit back and be supportive. But at the same time, needing to make sure we're in the right place to capture such beauty and such strength.
Yeah. So Barry, for you, was it always you wanted to let those speeches play out all the way?
Yeah. It was the speeches first. In the original script and in the book, the men speak in turn. I think Mingo says everything he has to say, and then John Valentine says everything he has to say. And then I got Chuck Woolley and Peter DeJersey together we had like one day, like a couple hours where we could rehearse, and they both knew their speeches so well that I could just point to them and go, okay, now you. And then I'd point to the other man and he would stop and the other man would start. And I realized, as a debate, this is really electric, because they're rebutting each other's thoughts. And seeing them do it, and just me being a witness to it in this classroom with just them, I thought, oh man, this is the best way to hear these arguments, to hear these thoughts that are kind of working towards the same goal, but in very different ways. And so James is right, with this crew and this cast, they're used to us having very clear formal ideas of how we want things to be. And this was an opportunity to cede the floor to them and go, no, every take, you guys are going to go from A to Z. And James and Jarrett, they will figure out like where to be. And because of that, this is the first time I've ever had it in my life working in digital cinema, where James had to come to me and go, hey, we might run out of footage. I go, no, we're just gonna have the memory card. He goes, no. If we keep doing takes this long, there is no more footage, not even in the entire state of Georgia. And so then near the end of filming the sequence, we had to get a little more dialed in about where we want to be at certain moments and do a few pickups. But yeah, every time we would just like call action, and those guys would do the entire thing. It was almost like watching like Hamlet, at the Globe in London. I mean, it was really beautiful.
Yeah, right. And from that point, the episode sort of erupts into violence that's over, a very large area and large scale, sort of, violent conflagration. So what were it feels like a scene that had to really be planned ahead and plotted out. What was it like, figuring out that one?
Yeah, it had to be plotted out. There almost had to be like a separate script was written, just to sort of explain out the beats of that sequence. We still wanted to film it in the same visual language that we film everything else. But on a television schedule, needing to work very fast, not having as many days as you might have on, say, like a Transformers, it meant that, when we got to do each piece of the sequence, it had to really count. Even doing it in the same sort of like, medium shots and really allowing the audience to have the perspective of one of the characters. And hats off to James, because there's no way to film this sequence that takes place over the course of 20 minutes. We had to film it over the course of, I don't know, like 8 or 9 days. And filming in the state of Georgia in the winter, that meant certain moments where I know in the film this is going to happen 30 seconds later, but now it's overcast and now it's bright sun. And so how do we like figure out how to do these things on the schedule we need to, but then have them actually like cut together in the edit? And that was James's purview, and somehow how was that for you, Jimmy?
I think there was probably about 4 I don't know, 14 or 15 different weather apps on my phone at some point, just to sort of see which one was the most accurate, and every day it changed. Yeah, I mean, that was definitely not the most fun, and definitely gave me some palpitations. But I do agree with what Barry said a moment ago, just that we tried our best to still continue our visual language throughout that sequence. You didn't want to sort of be a big departure for us, and I think we did a great job doing that, especially with some of the close-ups of Royal hiding between the pews. As Ridgway comes out of Royal's cabin, the shots that ring out in that shot as well, I think are very much within our language. And but that was the goal, was to sort of not deviate and to try to sort of still stay true to our sort of vision.
Right. Well, I want to end this with one more question, and it's, we live in a time when there is a sense in our culture that we need to come to terms with our history, but there's also a reluctance to do that, which you see manifested in things like, manufactured controversies about critical race theory. I do feel like artists are taking it upon themselves to say, all right, we're going to bear witness to what has happened over the course of history in this country. I mean, Barry, would you agree?
Yeah, I absolutely would agree. I have so many different ways to come at this answer. When a friend of mine, right before the show came out, said to me, "Have you seen Schindler's List?" I was like, "Yeah, of course." And then he goes, "But have you watched the acceptance speech for Best Picture for Schindler's List?" I go, "No, I haven't. Why would I do that?" He said, "No, you should watch it." And I was surprised. I didn't know what he was getting at. It actually gave me a little bit of hives because it was so award related. But I did watch it, and Mr. Spielberg's speech is incredible. He gets up and he says, there are 350,000 survivors of the Holocaust alive right now. Utilize them. Do not allow this history to be forgotten. And then another gentleman who was there in the concentration camps is the last person to speak, and he talks about watching a friend die, and that friend's last words saying, "Tell them how I lived. Tell them how I died. Do not let them forget my story," or something to that effect. I think we're all living in this moment right now where those words are incredibly prescient. This is a very young country. We haven't been around for very long, and so any history is recent history. And I think of being on the mix stage for this show on January 6th. And because we were mixing, I was hearing the show. One of the engineers had turned his laptop to face us, and we were watching the insurrection of January 6th, where the insurrectionists were trying to stop this vote count. Even without sound, I knew exactly what it was I was seeing. And now here we are a year and a half later, and there are people in this country still debating what it is we saw. I think that's a perfect example of the need to continue telling the truth through visual imagery about what it is that is actually happening and has happened in this country. And even in this story, it is a fictional take, on the Underground Railroad that's seated in magical realism, and yet it's very truthful about many things at the root of this country's founding and of my ancestors' struggle. And I think as artists, we have a responsibility to keep doing that. Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Well, I know this is a conversation we can continue to have and in many ways should continue to have, but I think we need to wrap up. So thank you guys for joining us. To everybody who's watching, thank you. It was great to have you here. Be sure to take advantage of our free trial TheWrap Pro so you can learn about these coming up, and you can register for upcoming screenings, catch up on past screenings you might have missed, and lots more by visiting TheWrap.com and going to the screenings tab. So Barry, James, thank you very much for a beautiful and powerful piece of work and for a great conversation.
Thank you, Steve.